January 29th, 1945, 2:47 in the afternoon. Holtzheim, Belgium. First Sergeant Leonard Funk rounded a farmhouse corner and stopped abruptly. 90 German soldiers stared back at him, weapons in hand or being gathered from a pile on the ground. 4 American soldiers knelt in the snow, hands behind their heads. These enemy troops had been prisoners merely 20 minutes prior. 80 of them had been captured by Funk's company during the assault on this very village. Guarded by a mere 4 men, all that could be spared, they were now free, armed, and preparing to attack Company C from their rear. A German officer advanced, thrusting an MP-40 submachine gun into Funk's abdomen, and bellowed something in German. Funk, like his fellow Americans, understood not a word. The officer's face flushed red as he repeated his demand, louder. Funk surveyed the 90 Germans, his 4 disarmed soldiers, and the menacing submachine gun against his gut. Then, he began to laugh. The German officer's expression contorted from confusion to outright fury. He roared again, and Funk's laughter intensified. What transpired next took less than 60 seconds. 21 Germans would perish. The remainder would discard their weapons and yield. Leonard Funk would subsequently be awarded the Medal of Honor for one of the most astonishing acts of combat in World War II, all initiated by his inability to stop laughing. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. was born on August 27, 1916, in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania, a steel town characterized by smokestacks and foundries along the Monongahela River, 8 miles east of Pittsburgh. Funk matured quickly, assuming responsibility early. By the time he completed high school in 1934, he had already been caring for his younger brother for years. The Great Depression was in its 5th year, jobs were scarce, and college was an unattainable dream. In June of 1941, with war engulfing Europe and Asia, Congress extended the draft. Funk's number was called, and he reported to the induction center in Willingsburg, Pennsylvania. He was 24 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, and weighed 140 pounds. The Army physical examiner likely considered him suitable for clerical duties, but they were mistaken. Funk volunteered for the paratroopers. In 1941, American airborne forces were in their nascent stages. The concept was novel. Descending from aircraft to land behind enemy lines and engage in combat, surrounded, sounded like a suicide mission to most soldiers. Volunteers, however, were a distinct breed, possessing a particular resilience. Airborne training was designed to be utterly grueling, involving 5 weeks of running, jumping, climbing, and falling, coupled with brutal physical conditioning that eliminated half the candidates. This was followed by jump towers and actual aircraft jumps. The first time one exited a C-47 at 1,200 feet, every instinct screamed to grip the doorframe and hold on. The ground seemed an immense distance below. The wind tore at one's face, and the parachute represented little more than fabric, cord, and faith. Funk earned his jump wings and was assigned to Company C 1st Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, at Camp Blanding, Florida. The 508th deployed to England in late 1943, joining the 82nd Airborne Division, the All-Americans, veterans of Sicily and Italy who had already experienced combat jumps, killing and witnessing friends fall. Funk, at 27, was considered ancient by paratrooper standards, with most of his squad mates barely 20. Yet, Funk possessed a maturity and steadfastness, a quiet competence that inspired trust and leadership. By D-Day, he was a squad leader, and during the entirety of the war, he would serve as the acting company executive officer. But first, He had to survive Normandy. At 1:30 a.m. on June 6, 1944, the C-47 Skytrain shuddered as flak exploded around it. Funk stood in the stick, the line of paratroopers awaiting their jump, burdened by 60 pounds of equipment, including an M1A1 Thompson submachine gun, ammunition, grenades, rations, and a medical kit. The aircraft was at 400 feet, far too low for a safe jump, but the pilots could not gain altitude due to pervasive German anti-aircraft fire. Tracers arced through the darkness like malevolent fireflies, and fragments pinged against the fuselage. The Normandy invasion involved 13,000 paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, tasked with landing behind the beaches, securing bridges and crossroads, and preventing German reinforcements from reaching the coast. Nothing proceeded as planned. The green light illuminated, and Funk jumped. The prop wash struck him with immense force, followed by the parachute's deployment and an eerie silence. Below lay occupied France, enemy territory in every direction. The D-Day airborne operation descended into chaos from its inception. German anti-aircraft fire had dispersed the formations across 50 miles of French countryside. Paratroopers landed in flooded fields, drowning under the weight of their gear, while others descended directly into German encampments, perishing before they could release their harnesses. Funk landed hard, his ankle twisting severely on impact, likely sprained or fractured. The pain was immediate and intense, promising agony with every step for the next 2 weeks. Nevertheless, he could walk and fight, and that was all that mattered. He gathered his parachute, buried it, and began to move. He was 40 miles from his drop zone, traversing 40 miles of German-held territory alone in the dark. Within hours, he had assembled a group of lost paratroopers from various units, all seeking leadership. Funk provided it. For 10 days, Funk led this contingent through German-occupied territory, traveling by night and hiding by day, engaging in combat when necessary. Despite his injured ankle, he insisted on serving as the lead scout, placing himself in the most perilous position to protect his men. They linked up with Allied forces on June 17th, with every single man surviving. Not a single casualty incurred during 10 days behind enemy lines and 40 miles through German-occupied France. Funk brought them all home, earning the Silver Star, the third highest combat decoration, a Bronze Star for meritorious service, and his first Purple Heart. Funk was merely beginning his combat journey. On September 17, 1944, in Holland, Operation Market Garden commenced, the largest airborne assault in history. 35,000 paratroopers dropped into the Netherlands to seize a series of bridges over the Rhine. British, American, and Polish forces jumped together. If successful, the Allies would be in Germany by Christmas. Field Marshal Montgomery's plan was ambitious, perhaps overly so. The paratroopers were tasked with capturing and holding 7 bridges across 64 miles of Dutch territory, while ground forces raced up a single highway to meet them. Everything hinged on speed, surprise, and the absence of complications. But complications arose. The British 1st Airborne Division landed at Arnhem, the furthest bridge, and found themselves surrounded by SS Panzer divisions that were not anticipated. For 9 days, they fought and died in the streets. Only 2,000 of the 10,000 men managed to escape. The bridge too far entered military history as a cautionary tale. Leonard Funk, however, was unaware of the broader strategic context. He focused solely on his mission: support the landings, secure the drop zones, and eliminate Germans. After touching down, his company secured their objective standard procedure. The 508th was operating near Nijmegen, assisting in the capture of bridges vital for ground force advancement. It was then that Funk observed something deviating from the plan. 3 German 20mm flak Vierling anti-aircraft guns were firing upon incoming Allied gliders. These gliders carried reinforcements, jeeps, artillery pieces, ammunition, and medical supplies. If those guns continued their barrage, hundreds of men would perish before even reaching the ground. The gun position was entrenched on high ground near Wegel, manned by approximately 20 German soldiers, supported by sandbags, camouflage, and interlocking fields of fire. Funk had only 3 men. Standard military doctrine dictates a 3-to-1 advantage for assaulting a prepared position. Funk faced the opposite, outnumbered 7-to-1. Nevertheless, he attacked. Leading from the front, Funk and his 3-man patrol assaulted the German position, eliminating the security detachment, storming the gun emplacements, and neutralizing all 3 weapons and their crews. 20 Germans against 3 Americans. The guns fell silent, and the gliders landed safely. Funk earned the Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest decoration for valor, 1 step below the Medal of Honor. He now possessed the Silver Star and the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 of the rarest combat decorations in the American military. Most soldiers who earned even 1 were considered lifelong heroes. Funk, however, was far from finished. On December 16, 1944, the Germans launched their final desperate offensive. 3 armies, 400,000 men, 1,400 tanks, and 1,900 artillery pieces crashed through the American lines in the Ardennes forest, aiming for the port of Antwerp. Hitler's plan was audacious but nearly succeeded. He gambled everything on one massive assault to split the Allied armies, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace in the West, allowing Germany to concentrate its forces against the Soviets in the East. For the Americans, it was a nightmare. The offensive struck thinly held sectors manned by inexperienced troops and exhausted veterans pulled from the front lines for rest. Entire divisions crumbled, and thousands of soldiers surrendered. The German advance created a bulge 50 miles deep in the Allied lines, the Battle of the Bulge, the largest battle the American army would fight in World War II, resulting in 89,000 American casualties by its conclusion. The weather was brutal, with snow, ice, and temperatures dropping to 5 degrees below zero. Soldiers froze to death in their foxholes, weapons jammed, and vehicles refused to start. The cold proved as lethal as the Germans. Then came Malmedy. On December 17, 1944, 1 day into the offensive, a convoy from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion was advancing near the Bonnier Crossroads when they encountered the spearhead of Kampfgruppe Piper, an SS armored battle group. The Americans were rear echelon troops, artillery observers and radio operators, ill-equipped to engage tanks and armored infantry. After a brief skirmish, 113 Americans surrendered and were herded into a farmer's field near the crossroads. Hands raised, disarmed, they were prisoners of war. Then, the SS opened fire with machine guns, pistols, and rifles, gunning them down like cattle. Men attempting to flee were cut down, and those who fell wounded were finished off with shots to the head. 84 Americans died in that field. Some survived by feigning death, lying in the snow for hours while German boots and mocking voices passed over them. As darkness fell, 43 survivors crawled away and made their way back to American lines. News of the massacre spread rapidly through the American army. Within hours, Germans were executing prisoners. Malmedy changed everything. Before this, the war in Europe operated under unwritten, unofficial, but understood rules. Soldiers surrendered when the situation was hopeless, and prisoners were treated according to the Geneva Convention, with a grim professionalism between enemies. After Malmedy, those rules vanished. American soldiers swore never to surrender to the SS. Some units issued direct orders: no SS prisoners. When Funk learned of the massacre, something hardened within him. He had already witnessed too much horror: Normandy, Holland, friends dying across Europe. But this was different. This was murder, a cold-blooded execution of men who had surrendered in good faith. Leonard Funk resolved never to surrender to the Germans, a decision that would soon prove critically important. On January 29, 1945, in the Ardennes, the German offensive had been broken, and the Allies were now advancing. Company C, 508th Parachute Infantry, received orders to capture the Belgian village of Holzheim. There was a significant problem. Company C was understrength. Their executive officer, second in command, had been killed, leaving them insufficient men for the assault. Funk, now acting executive officer, surveyed his depleted roster and made a decisive choice. He proceeded to the company headquarters tent, where clerks, supply personnel, and cooks, men who typically avoided direct combat, were stationed. "You're all infantry now," Funk informed them. "Grab your weapons. We're taking that village." He formed a makeshift platoon of 30 men who had spent most of the war behind desks. While they had received basic training, most had never fired a shot at another human being in actual combat. Funk, however, needed bodies and intended to forge them into soldiers. The march to Holzheim was 15 miles through waist-deep snow in a driving blizzard, with temperatures well below freezing. German artillery shells exploded around them, harassing fire from the flanks. Funk led from the front. Upon reaching Holzheim, Funk organized the assault. His clerks, his improvised warriors, followed him into the village, where Germans occupied 15 houses, armed with machine guns, rifles, and grenades. Funk and his men cleared every house, capturing 30 prisoners without a single American casualty. Another unit apprehended 50 more Germans on the other side of town, bringing the total prisoner count to 80. They were corralled in the yard of a farmhouse. Funk, observing his exhausted men who had been marching and fighting for hours, and knowing there was still scattered German resistance elsewhere in the village, could only spare 4 men to guard the prisoners. "Keep them here," he instructed the guards. "We'll send reinforcements when we can." Funk then rejoined the fight, oblivious to the events about to unfold behind him. While Funk was engaged in clearing the rest of Holzheim, a German patrol approached the farmhouse. 10, perhaps 20 men, wearing white camouflage capes over their uniforms. In the snow and confusion, they were nearly indistinguishable from American troops in winter gear. The 4 guards failed to recognize the danger until it was too late. The Germans overwhelmed them, disarmed them, and forced them to their knees. They then liberated the prisoners. 80 German soldiers, plus the patrol that freed them, totaling 90 men, seized weapons from the pile and quickly organized. Their objective was clear: attack Company C from the rear. Funk's company was dispersed throughout the village, engaged in mopping up resistance, and completely unprepared for an assault from behind. If 90 Germans struck them while scattered, it would result in a massacre. The German officer in charge, likely a lieutenant or captain, began issuing orders. "Position the machine guns here. Set up the ambush there. Wait for my signal." It was at this precise moment that Leonard Funk rounded the corner. Funk had returned to check on the prisoners, a routine task to ensure the guards were safe and to see if reinforcements had arrived. He certainly did not anticipate walking into a scene involving 90 armed Germans. As he rounded the corner of the farmhouse, he froze. The scene was surreal. His 4 guards were on their knees in the snow. The prisoners, who should have been unarmed and contained, were standing everywhere, rifles in their hands, preparing for battle. The German officer immediately spotted Funk, his first sergeant stripes marking him as a leader, a prize. The officer strode forward, shoved his MP-40 into Funk's stomach, and bellowed a command in German. "Surrender! Drop your weapon!" However, Funk did not speak German and had no idea what the officer was saying. The officer repeated his command, louder, his face turning crimson, veins bulging in his neck. Funk looked around. 90 Germans, half of them armed, his 4 men disarmed and helpless, and 1 other American soldier standing beside him, equally vulnerable. The odds of survival were 0. There was no conceivable scenario where Leonard Funk could win this confrontation. He was outnumbered 90-1. The sensible, rational course of action would be to surrender. But Funk remembered Malmedy. 84 Americans murdered in a field, shot like animals, left to freeze in the snow. He had already committed to never surrendering to the Germans. Therefore, instead of complying, Leonard Funk did something inexplicable. He began to laugh. No one knows precisely why Funk laughed. It may have been a deliberate tactic to confuse the enemy and gain time, a ruse. It could have been stress, as the human brain reacts in peculiar ways when faced with imminent death. Or it might have been genuine amusement at the sheer absurdity of the situation. An officer screaming in a language Funk couldn't understand, expecting compliance. Funk himself later stated that he tried to stop laughing but couldn't. Something about the Germans' German screams struck a nerve. Whatever the reason, the effect was devastating. The German officer screamed louder, and Funk laughed harder, bending over, his shoulders shaking. He called out to his men, "I don't understand what he's saying." Some of the German soldiers began to laugh as well, creating a bizarre tension. Their officer was turning purple with rage, while this American refused to stop cackling. The officer was utterly disoriented. This was not how prisoners behaved. They begged, they pleaded, they complied. They did not stand there laughing while a gun was shoved into their stomachs. For a few critical seconds, the German officer was paralyzed, unsure of what to do. Leonard Funk seized those seconds. Still appearing to laugh, Funk slowly reached up towards his Thompson submachine gun, slung over his shoulder in the standard paratrooper carrying position. The German officer watched, believing the American was finally surrendering his weapon. Funk's hand closed around the grip of the Thompson, and he began to unsling it slowly, carefully. The German relaxed slightly, anticipating another prisoner, another trophy. Then, with a motion faster than thought, Funk swung the Thompson down, brought the muzzle into line, and squeezed the trigger. The M1A1 Thompson fired 45 ACP rounds at 600 rounds per minute. At close range, each round struck with the force of a sledgehammer, not merely wounding, but destroying. The initial burst caught the German officer in the chest, 30 rounds in less than 3 seconds. He was dead before he hit the ground. Funk did not stop. He couldn't stop. The moment he began shooting, he had committed himself to killing everyone or dying. There was no middle ground. He pivoted, still firing. The Thompson sprayed an arc of lead across the nearest German soldiers. Men screamed, men fell, blood spattered across the snow, and brass casings tumbled through the air, steaming in the cold. The magazine ran dry, 30 rounds expended in seconds. This was the critical moment. Reloading a Thompson, even for a practiced individual, took 2 seconds, an eternity in a firefight, enough time for 90 Germans to kill 1 American. Funk yanked out the empty magazine, slammed in a fresh one, racked the bolt, and continued firing. The entire sequence took less than a heartbeat, muscle memory honed by thousands of hours of training compressed into one fluid motion. Simultaneously, he screamed at his men, "Pick up their weapons! Pick up their weapons!" The 4 guards, still on their knees, scrambled for the rifles dropped by the dead Germans. Seconds ago, they were prisoners. Now they were fighting for their lives. The Germans were in disarray. Their officer was dead, and the American who had been laughing was now systematically killing them. No one had orders for this, and no one knew what to do. Some of them fired back, bullets cracking past Funk's head. 1 round killed the soldier standing beside him. Funk continued to fire, moving, killing. His guards now possessed weapons and were also firing. The Germans found themselves caught in a crossfire they had never anticipated. 60 seconds was all it took. 21 German soldiers lay dead in the snow. 24 more were wounded. The remainder, over 40, had thrown down their weapons and raised their hands. The prisoners were prisoners once again. Leonard Funk stood amidst the carnage, smoke rising from his Thompson, surrounded by bodies. That, he stated to his men, was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. The aftermath was almost anticlimactic. Company C secured Holzheim. The captured Germans, the survivors at least, were marched to the rear under much heavier guard this time. Funk reported the incident to his commanding officer, framing it as just another firefight, just another day at war. However, the story spread rapidly through the regiment, through the division, and throughout the entire 82nd Airborne. The sergeant who laughed at 90 Germans and killed half of them with a Tommy gun. Upon reaching Washington, the commendation for the Medal of Honor faced no challenge. The actions of Funk at Holzheim were undeniably heroic and beyond question. Faced with overwhelming odds, outnumbered 90-1, with an enemy weapon pressed against his person, instead of succumbing, he launched an offensive. The official citation records that a German officer, brandishing a submachine pistol against his abdomen, ordered him to surrender. Despite being vastly outnumbered and confronting almost certain demise, First Sergeant Funk, feigning compliance, began to slowly disengage his submachine gun from his shoulder. Then, with astonishing speed, he brought the weapon to bear and unleashed a torrent of fire, felling the German officer. He then turned his attention to the remaining German soldiers, firing and rallying his fellow Americans to seize the enemy's arms. September 5th, 1945. The White House. President Harry Truman bestows the Medal of Honor upon Leonard Funk. "I would rather possess this medal," Truman declared, "than hold the office of President of the United States. Let us tally Leonard Funk's distinctions earned during World War II, a Medal of Honor for his actions at Holzheim, a Distinguished Service Cross for his role against anti-aircraft batteries in Holland, a Silver Star for guiding 18 men through 40 miles of enemy territory in Normandy, a Bronze Star for meritorious service, and a Purple Heart, awarded 3 times, signifying his recovery from 3 separate wounds sustained in combat. Yet he continued to fight. Furthermore, he received the Croix de Guerre from France, the Order of Leopold from Belgium, and the Military Order of William from the Netherlands, their highest honors, equivalent to the Victoria Cross. Leonard Funk stands as the most decorated paratrooper of World War II. Standing at 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing 140 pounds, he transitioned from a former retail clerk to an enduring legend. The war concluded, and Funk returned home. He did not pen a memoir, nor did he embark on a speaking tour. He did not leverage his Medal of Honor for a platform of public engagement or political advocacy. He chose not to capitalize on his wartime renown. Instead, he resettled in Pennsylvania and secured employment with the Veterans Administration. The VA, a vast governmental body tasked with the welfare of America's former servicemen, assisting other veterans with navigating bureaucratic processes, managing disability claims, and expediting assistance for those who had sacrificed so much and now required support for what they were owed. This was akin to the same clerical work he performed prior to the war, the same quiet, unglamorous, yet essential work. For 27 years, Leonard Funk sat at his desk, dedicated to aiding veterans. He progressed through the ranks, ultimately assuming the position of division chief at the Pittsburgh Regional Office. He enjoyed a respectable salary, consistent working hours, and the promise of a pension upon retirement. His wife, Gertrude, remained steadfastly by his side throughout this entire period. Together, they raised 2 daughters. Their residence was in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, a community of working-class families in a working-class town not far from his birthplace. The Medal of Honor resided within a display case somewhere, alongside the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and all the foreign decorations from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. He rarely, if ever, spoke of them. When queried about Holzheim, about the laughter, about the engagement with 90 German soldiers, he would simply shrug. "Did what I had to do," was his invariable response, the entirety of his statement. November 20th, 1992. Braddock Hills, Pennsylvania. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. succumbed to cancer at the age of 76. He was interred at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 35, grave 23,734, among the honored dead of every American conflict. At the time of his passing, he was the last surviving recipient of the Medal of Honor from the 82nd Airborne Division during World War II. A fitness center at Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, bears his name. A highway in Pennsylvania is also designated in his honor. In 2023, a post office in McKeesport was dedicated to him. Yet the majority of people remain unaware of Leonard Funk. They recognize figures like Audie Murphy or Alvin York, celebrated recipients of the Medal of Honor. They are unfamiliar with the diminutive, unassuming paratrooper who faced 90 Germans with a smile and neutralized 21 of them with a Tommy gun. The narrative of Leonard Funk offers profound insights. Warfare does not favor stature, nor does it preferentially select the physically imposing. It does not reward rashness or an absence of fear. Instead, war favors those who maintain their cognitive faculties when all others falter. At Holzheim, Leonard Funk possessed every conceivable justification for capitulation. The odds were insurmountable. 90 combatants against a single individual, a weapon held against his person. His comrades had already been apprehended. Any rational person would have yielded. However, Funk was not contemplating the arithmetic of the situation. His thoughts were occupied by the Malmedy massacre, by the 84 Americans brutally murdered in a field, by the atrocities inflicted upon prisoners by the Germans, and by his own men, the 4 guards on their knees, the soldiers dispersed throughout the village who would be vulnerable to a rear assault if these Germans were allowed to escape. Hence, he laughed, perhaps as a strategic maneuver, perhaps as a release of intense stress, or perhaps because the entire scenario struck him as utterly preposterous. And while the German officer was disoriented, while the entire enemy contingent was caught off guard, Leonard Funk seized the moment. Within 60 seconds, he stood alone in a field of fallen bodies, alive when he should have been deceased. There exists a widely attributed quote from President Truman regarding the Medal of Honor. "I would rather possess this medal than hold the office of President of the United States." He conveyed this sentiment directly to Leonard Funk. September 5, 1945. The White House Rose Garden. Consider this moment. The most influential figure on the planet, the individual who had just orchestrated the conclusion of World War II, the man poised to redefine the global geopolitical landscape. He stood before a 5'5" former store clerk from Pennsylvania and declared, "I would rather be you." Because Truman comprehended, as does anyone who reviews the citations for the Medal of Honor, that valor is not contingent upon physical size, strength, or specialized training. Valor is demonstrated by one's actions when confronted with a weapon against one's abdomen and 90 individuals intent on one's demise.